Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Tony Donné. Tony is the former CEO of EUROfusion, a European consortium of 31 national fusion research institutes in 26 EU countries, plus Switzerland, UK, and Norway. Before that, he was head of the Fusion Physics Division at the Dutch Institute for Fundamental Energy Research and responsible for the coordination of the nuclear fusion research in the Netherlands. In 2023, he co-founded Frontiers in Energy Innovations. Tony is chair of the Science and Technology Advisory Committee of General Fusion and a member of the Fusion Expert Committee advising the Bavarian government. Tony, welcome to the Future Space.
It's a pleasure, Daniel. Nice to meet you again.
Yes, we had a great time at Starmus earlier this year in Bratislava. It was one of those encounters that I'm really happy that happened.
Absolutely, it's a great event.
Now, before we get into fusion and the role of energy in the future and the work that you've been pushing and doing over the years, what would be for you 3 words that capture the essence of space?
I would say endless, opportunities, and peace.
Peace?
Peace, yeah.
Tell me more.
I have seen that fusion, the field in which I work, is a field where peace is very important. And already since the early 60s, despite the Cold War, the US and Russia and Europe have been working together and without any limitations on the border. When Ukraine joined EUROfusion, it were the Russians which congratulated me with the fact that, well, thank God, because now finally we can work with our Ukrainian friends via EUROfusion because we cannot directly communicate with them. And I see also in the ISS that Russian cosmonauts and American, European astronauts are working together, and they, well, basically have a lot of fun, they have a good time. And I see that science is typically a field where you can work despite any political hurdles, and very often scientists build bridges where politicians have built walls. And I think we should actually make sure that in space will be a field of peace, no competition. Well, of course there's competition, but a friendly competition, very much like you now have and like we had in the past with the moon race, and well, it's coming now again. But I think we need to learn from each other and forget about, let's say, the politics and try to really bring people together.
Do you think that now with the rise of China in space, but also China has been pretty active in the nuclear energy, have you noticed the same kind of will to cooperate in that field on the nuclear in China?
Oh, absolutely. With China, my previous organization had always a very tight collaboration, where we work on aspects of let's say nuclear fusion. I'm myself chairing an international advisory committee of a very big Chinese experiment. And so the Chinese are very open, they're very willing to collaborate. They're also very willing to contribute. So the naive idea of many people is that the Chinese, they absorb knowledge from the West and then they make use of it. And ultimately you can buy the knowledge back from China. In my field, it has been that we really set up collaborations where they deliver, we deliver, and we really agree, and there's a very good balance. And if you try to set it up from the onset in that kind of way, you can make sure that it works. And the Chinese are very open there, so I really enjoy the collaboration with them.
You hinted on the difference in narrative between the science narrative and the political narrative. So you see the same kind of desire to cooperate on the science level with China. Do you think that the Chinese politics might come and be a challenge, or the politics in China also are aiming to the same goal?
Yeah, well, that's difficult to say. I'm very bad in crystal ball gazing, so well, fusion is still in a kind of stage where it's pretty much science, and there's not yet, let's say, fusion reactors which you can buy off the shelf, or companies building fusion reactors. Many say they can build a fusion reactor in 5 years. I think that's overly optimistic. I think more, well, let's say the time scale is, well, 15, 20 years. And it could well be that at that time scale, the politics will basically decide what science should do. That I cannot tell. But for the time being, the collaboration is very open and pretty balanced, I would say.
You mentioned peace. Peace is one of your words about space. And I have a feeling that that's going to be connected to your answer also about the next question. We know, I mean, the same thing could be said also about energy. That there's always a science story, there's the technology story, there's the politics of it. But what would be the human story of space for you?
Well, what I've been thinking a little bit about this question, I see that humans are always very curious. It starts already when you're a little child and you're running around in the garden in your diapers, and you want to know what is behind the hedge. You know to want to peek in your neighbor's garden. And when we grow up, I think for many people, this kind of natural curiousness of exploring, of finding what is behind the fence, what is, people always want to travel, want to discover new areas where they have never been, new experiences. And the same is with space. So we are naturally very curious and we want to explore. At the same time, I think it's also for humanity very important that we keep doing that, because it could well be that on asteroids or on the moon or Mars, we find minerals, we find certain elements which we don't have, where there's a scarcity of it at Earth, which we then can use here at Earth. And again, it would be very good if that's done in a peaceful, that we are not getting also a space war or whatever, but that we find a way to get rid of these stupid wars, because I find it a waste of energy, a waste of capital, a waste of people, really. I think we are grown up enough, I would say, but some people are not, that we should be able to work peacefully together. And since space is still, let's say, largely unmanned, of course we have some people in the ISS and there's this Chinese space station. But when more and more people go to Earth to really set up international collaborations, to do things together, and I think that's for the benefit of mankind.
So for pretty much since the Industrial Revolution, and even today, our relationship with energy is still remain on the same concept, right? Where the energy that fuels everything is no different really than what it was 70 years ago. It's just more efficient on a bigger scale, but the fundamentals aspect of it have not changed. For the next step of space exploration and that vision of growth and sustainability of here on Earth, I think that we're poised to find this next big leap in energy. I think that will redefine what is possible and what is not possible. Do you see nuclear fusion really at the center of this revolution, of that next big leap?
I would say fusion is one of the elements. It's very good that we have renewable energies, wind, solar, biomass. I don't know whether it's really good, but some people call it good. But okay. But hydro, geothermal, that's all great, but that's not sufficient. I see it here in Germany where I live. Germany has 50% of the energy coming from renewables, and at more than 50% of the days in the year, Germany is one of the most polluting countries in Europe, simply because they don't have enough wind and solar, and they need to use then fossil fuels. And they use the cheapest of all, that's peat, which they have in surplus here. and so that's really very polluting. And as long as we don't solve the storage problem with renewables because of the intermittency, we need baseload energy. And at the moment, baseload energy can only be delivered by fossils and by nuclear fission, and in the future, hopefully, also with nuclear fusion.
On the fun, I mean, you and I, we talked about that. In my younger years, I actually considered going into the lobbyism of nuclear energy, because I've always believed that nuclear energy was a big part of the future, and I always wonder what our world would look like had in the 70s not decided to go against it, but with it and keep investing in technology, and how different maybe the world is today. And you know, you allude to Germany, the big difference between Germany and France, where France decided to go full in nuclear, and Germany decided to go against it, and now they're a much bigger polluter than France. How do you see it, how moving forward, or even Germany? How are they going to get out of that hole and try to do better?
Well, as long as they have a green government, I don't have any hope. But next year there will be new elections, so I hope the Greens are then out of the government. They're very hypocrite. I read today that one of the ministers took a night flight over 184 kilometers basically with the government plane to witness one of the football matches here. And it's kind of ridiculous. At the same time, they want to forbid people of flying and try to come up with all kinds of ludicrous rules. They don't understand, let's say, what fission is. So it's all really a big push by the Greens to get out of nuclear. And I would say nuclear is safe. We had a few accidents in the past where basically, not many people died. So I hear the Green Minister of Energy and Environment saying that Fukushima has cost 10,000 people their life. No, it was the tsunami which cost 10,000 people their life, and as a side effect, the reactor got damaged and exploded. And the people had to evacuate, but no people were directly, let's say, dying from the radiation. Of course, people might have suffered from being displaced, and especially elder and vulnerable people might have, died because of that, but still there's not direct casualties. Chernobyl, it were the workers which were sent in by at that time, the Soviet regime, to, let's say, put this whole reactor in a sarcophage, and those basically got many cancer cases. Of course, that bad 3 Mile Island, that's the other nuclear accident. I think the number of casualties is very low. So the risk of nuclear fission is much lower than of fossils. I read, and these numbers are a little fake, but I believe that, let's say, in a yearly level, on a yearly basis, I mean that 10 million people die every year because of inhalation of the exhaust from fossil fuel centers. And so we need to get rid of that as soon as possible. And we all suffer from the climate problem. And the only way, in my view, to tackle the climate problem in the very short term is nuclear fission. And then I would say in the second half of the century, nuclear fusion. Because even if we get it to work in, let's say, 15 years, or let's say there's a private fusion company which does it even in 10 years, it will take another 10, 20 years before you can build sufficient fusion plants to really cover the world.
Yeah, it's, I mean, despite all the accidents and the numbers of nuclear, it is still the safest energy compared to fossil fuel. It's just that, fossil fuel is more in the background, is not really in your face. But if you really start to add up everything, right? Everything that happened, nuclear energy is by far the safest and more productive. And people forget that, submarine aircraft carriers have been working on nuclear energy for years and years, and you know, if we want that next leap of exploration or that future that we're looking to, renewable are extremely great for complementing the grid and daily use. But this push, if we want a world with ubiquitous energy, where energy is you know, kind of a second thought in the same way that information is today, right? Information today, we don't really think about scarcity when it comes to information because it's too much information. But back in the days, there was a time where information was a currency that was extremely, you know, it was hard. And so if you could control that currency.
Interesting that you say that, because it's the information which costs also much more energy.
Yeah.
Like when you now ask something to ChatGPT, it costs 10 times more energy than when you basically have a search request in Google. So you see these enormous data factories by Google and some of these other companies, which are really enormous. And the CO2 emission, I just read it today that the CO2 emission by Google has increased by 13% this year compared to last year.
Wow. It's and there's always been this idea that, you know, we need to go back into a place in the past where things were working better, right? And trying to convince the world to do less, or to travel less, or to eat less, and it's always once life has grown to a place, it's general incentive is always to move forward. It's never to go backward. And the idea should be, how can we do more but better, as opposed to and really get people to find solutions ahead, rather than thinking that we have to turn around and just scale everything back, because then it puts people into a sense of denial and sense of guilt, and then everybody doesn't want to address the elephant in the room, because, you know, it's something that we're not approaching in the right way. Was that like your approach to that?
Well, I think if we have good solutions from the past which work, like nuclear, we had over 20 years, I think nuclear has become unpopular. But in recent time, you see again that this is changing. Even now in Germany, the majority of the population is pro-nuclear, whereas let's say 3-4 years ago, it was anti-nuclear, so it was basically 60% anti-nuclear, 40% in favor, and now it turned around, especially because we have seen the potential danger, and it went all fine in Germany, but with the war in Ukraine and the dependency on the Russian fossil fuels, so there was a risk that in the first winter of the war, Germany would not have enough energy to heat the houses. It went all fine. And then people started to realize, hey, nuclear isn't that bad. And they slowly also start now to, basically to understand the details and the reasons. And it's unfortunately, a lot of the anti-nuclear movement is ideology rather than based on scientific facts. And nowadays I have also the impression that people don't have depth, in the sense that many people, they just browse on their phone or on the computer to headlines in the news. They read for 1 minute in the article, and then they go to the next article. On the basis of that, they form an opinion, whereas, let's say, in the past, you had a newspaper at home, you were reading the articles, and, you spend a few hours per weekend to go through the articles, and many people are not doing that anymore. So, because of that, people can be more easily influenced, which you see also at many places in the world, but yeah, the people also don't make proper decisions unless they see something is going really wrong, and of course they revolt and they want to have something which works. And so yeah, I agree with you. At the one hand we should look forward, on the other hand we should not, if we had good solutions in the past which we basically disabandoned for whatever reason, maybe the wrong reason, we should be able to get back to them.
Yeah, it's always interesting when people start complaining, or they will make, these big statements like "I will not fly again" or "I have this guilt of doing anything," but then they go watching 6 hours on Netflix at night, not understanding the energy that it demands, or their emails, like the footprints of a modern, just with the phone, right? This thing gives us, and now with ChatGPT or AI, the world is not looking to use less energy. It's using, it's looking into using more energy. But again, the more and more, and the question should be again, not how can we do less, but how can we do more, but better. Tony, like in your lifetime, nuclear has remained kind of almost, I would not say the same, but there's these big ideas of what it could be and what it is. We have people like Bill Gates have been investing a lot. Now we've been getting some recent headlines about there's been these milestones that have been accomplished, or some people are saying, well, the concept has been proven, but it was still a very far, very, very far away. When you look at the progress, like bringing context to what we're trying to achieve, the progress that you've seen over, your career in the field, do you think it's still, it's a goose chase, or like we're close, we've done some like big leaps, a big achievement? Where do you think that we stand right now and where we're going?
Well, I have the impression things are accelerating. So basically, I think fusion research really took off in the, I would say, late 50s, early 60s. And initially there was a big hype because everyone thought that fusion would be, let's say, introduced in the market as fast as fission. But it turned out to be much more difficult, and it has been a long path. There have been a number of breakthroughs where there were unexpected discoveries which really brought us forward at once in a leap. There have been many advances. I would say the recent, let's say, results by the National Ignition Facility in the US, where they had ignition. Many people call that a breakthrough. I call that an advance because this was planned already in 1990, and the scientists have been working to that for a long, long time, and it's possible, and ultimately you get there. The same what we did in JAD, so in the European tokamak, which we stopped at the end of last year, but just before we did that, we generated 69 megajoule of fusion energy from 200 microgram of fuel. So it's like the weight of a firefly, and with that you create as much energy to boil something like 100 liters of water. It doesn't sound much, but it shows the potential in fusion. Then we have all these private startups, private companies. Some are not anymore startups because they are already around for like 20 years, which are really working very hard on alternative concepts, and which are also going fast. So we are now really in a stage where, at the one hand, there's many different companies, many different organizations working on different ideas. It's easier to get investments. It's now getting a little bit harder the last year, but until a year ago it was relatively easy to get investments, and that's related to the very, very low interest rates, of course. You see breakthroughs, also the private companies, they report breakthroughs. So we're really at a stage where things are going fast. There still a number of elements which make fusion go slow, and one is the development of fusion materials. So you need materials which are resilient to the neutrons. So in the fusion reaction, you create neutrons with a very high energy. These neutrons, they come into the wall where they should breed the tritium. So tritium is the other part of the fuel we need. But and you use the heat of these neutrons. But the neutrons have a negative side effect that they make the wall radioactive and potentially brittle. So we need to find wall materials which can withstand these neutrons for long enough a time. We're working on that, we're making progress, but it's really going very slow. And many of the private companies are not working on that, but it's the public research which is doing that. And since we are very prone of taking risks, the work is going slow because, I think that sets really the time schedule. But we have seen now in the results from NIF and from JET, we can do it. We can make these very hot plasmas. We can create fusion reactions. And I'm convinced we get it going. But it's not easy. It's also kind of difficult because either you go to a very big project. So the by far biggest project in the world at this moment is ITER, the international machine which is built in southern France, which is a collaboration of the United States, Europe, Russia, India, South Korea, Japan and China. And this device should come in operation around 2030, and around 2035 it's coming into the nuclear phase. It's a huge device. It's order, I think, 25 billion euro, dollar. There's not much difference there. And that should show for the first time that we can create 10 times more energy than we put in the process. It will not yet be a reactor where we create electricity, so that will be next step. So these are really large projects which are politically also very vulnerable because they're set up in a political way which is not the best way, but it's the only way you can find this collaboration. So, for instance, in ITER, each partner delivers in kind. And of course, every partner in the world wants to know how to make certain components. So some of the components are distributed over 6 or 7 partners over the world. Means you're creating interfaces, you create factories at different places of the world, which means for the ITER project, they increase the cost enormously. Of course, for the follow-up project, if individual countries make their own reactor, it pays back, but only then. But all the interfaces that make it rather complicated and very lengthy, and that's causing these very long time paths.
It's incredible. I mean, the technology and just what we're able to achieve. You know, you look at CERN, and now you're, ITER, these projects, the scale, really when you take a second to process what we've been able to achieve, and and then if you put it into context into the past, we were hunting whales for hundreds of years before it moved to coal, and it was not necessarily that the technology was not there. It was just the incentive, right? You keep doing something that works. There's an entire infrastructure that is built around it, and even if you have something better, it does. It's not necessarily that suddenly everybody's going to jump on it. It takes a lot to change. Change is, not something that people usually run for. It's something that people have to deal for. And, even exploration, the lack of resources, of getting to a place where resources become scarce, it's always connected with this incentive of going and beyond the horizon or beyond the river, or even having the kids leave the family house is because they need to go and find their own life and create their own, and with the children. So right now, I guess, with the problem, the crisis of energy and where we are and the crisis on the planet, the incentives are there for people. They're forced, right? They're forced to come to the table and to figure out solutions. Do you see, I mean, I know you don't have you said you're not good with crystal balls, but do you say about 50 years, 60, 75 years for our world to be really drastically different with its relationship with energy?
I think this will start already much earlier. So I would say around 2050. I'm convinced that before that time we have shown that we can get electricity from fusion. And it's like, let's say, designing cars. The first T-Ford was not the car you would buy nowadays, unless you like vintage cars. But but they're not efficient. And of course, after you have the first, then you start improving, and it gets easier and better, and also cheaper. And I think as soon as fusion shows that it works, it will be much easier to get the funding. Of course, important to say, not only that it shows it works, but also that we show that we can make it commercially competitive. Because if fusion works, but that's like 10 times more expensive than any other energy source, no one wants to buy it. And so this is something we have to work on. We need to find proper solutions which are not too expensive. There's a lot of economic studies, socio-economic studies for fusion, which show that roughly the price would be equivalent to fission, and the fuel itself is very cheap, because a reactor like a 2 gigawatt electric reactor, which gives enough power for a city of 5 million people, uses only 500 kilograms of fuel. And that's basically lithium and deuterium. Deuterium is a form of hydrogen which we take out of water. So the fuel is extremely cheap and is everywhere available. I think even in the desert you can find somewhere 200 kilo of water when you drill deep enough. So that's not a problem, but the infrastructure is of course very expensive, and so that needs to be paid off in typically 40 years. But first estimates we made are relatively positive, that we say, well, okay. And we are looking also in advances. For instance, for the magnets which we use in magnetic fusion, we are now looking more and more in high temperature magnets, which help you to, well, you don't need to cool anymore to liquid helium temperature, but you can cool to 20 Kelvin, which is a much higher temperature. It means that the cryogenic cooling is not that expensive anymore. It's easier, and probably we find new materials where you can go to higher temperatures. There's also groups which say, well, with these high temperature superconductors we can go to higher magnetic fields, and you can make a much more compact device. And so we don't need to build it very big. We don't need a machine which is 25 billion, but maybe only 10% of that, so 2-3 billion. So there's different concepts. In the city where you live, Vancouver, there's an organization, General Fusion, which has a completely different concept, and they are building or working on a fusion device. If they get it to work, they will have units in the order of a few hundred megawatt electric rather than the very big gigawatt electric. So you have a small unit which you can put somewhere, let's say very close to a region where people live, because it's fully safe. There's no meltdowns, so you don't have the risks of nuclear fission there.
It's incredible. Did you? I'm kind of curious. Like when I interview astronauts, there's always kind of a direct link to when they were young. Something happened. Their father was a pilot. They ended up being a pilot, and then they went to being an astronaut, or they grew up looking up to the stars, and then they wanted to go to the stars. Did you go to school and fell in love with energy, or was that something that you wanted to work in, or was just kind of a luck of the journey?
I would say it's a coincidence. I grew up in the 60s. I went to the primary school. I was allowed by my parents to stay up all night to look at the moon landing, so I was quite excited. I wanted to become an astronaut, and then I decided to study astrophysics, which I did, but at my university it was only possible as a minor. So I had physics as a major and astrophysics as a minor, and then at some point my dean told me that, well, if I stay in astrophysics then probably I would end up as a teacher, which I like teaching, but not standing all my life in front of the class, so I was not ready for that. So I thought, well, okay, let's switch to physics. And I started off I did my PhD in nuclear physics, not fission, but really nuclear, fundamental nuclear physics. Then at the end of my PhD, at the time I was married, my wife, she was a biochemist and she just found a permanent position at the Free University of Amsterdam. I had 2 postdoc offers to come to the United States to work in nuclear physics, but then I didn't want to, well, basically go on my own. My wife didn't want to give up her job, so I decided to stay in the Netherlands. And the only possibility for me was to swap fields. So I swapped to plasma physics. And plasma physics, that's actually the physics which is underlying fusion. And well, I really liked it there, the laboratory. I liked the kind of work, and so since then I stayed there. I got a permanent position relatively quickly, and yeah, it was quite enjoyable. So I rolled actually by coincidence in fusion. I hadn't planned that because originally I would do astrophysics. But
here you are now in nuclear, and maybe your second career, go back to your roots and create something new.
Well, I can tell you, I have been in Europe. We have an organization called EUROfusion, which is the consortium of the 8 largest science organizations. So it includes CERN, it includes the European Space Agency, it includes the European Southern Observatory. When the Southern Observatory was chairing, they decided to have a meeting in Chile at the telescope. So we went to the very large telescope, we went to ALMA, the radio telescope. And well, for me, that was fantastic. And I really thought, you know, if I would have stayed in astrophysics, I would maybe have been here rather than being a teacher. So I thought, well, you know, if I wouldn't have made a decision then it could be, you know, for me, I was relatively green. I didn't know much when I was studying what are the typical career paths and what can you do. And I think if I could have made it in fusion, I probably would have made it also in astrophysics. But well, you never know, of course. But at that moment I thought, well, yeah, I could go back and, you know, or I could have done this. But yeah, to go back now after all this time, I'm still working quite a lot as consultant for many companies and giving advice. I have so much experience over 45 years in this field that yeah, I can make still use of that. So whereas if I would go in astrophysics, I need to start all over again.
How much do you think that the AI is going to play into both astrophysics and the nuclear, into advancing the fields of figuring out maybe some of the questions that we've been struggling over the years, and that now with these new tools, they're really going to kind of help us push things along?
AI in fusion is already very important in very many aspects. But one is the plasma control. So we have these enormous hot gases, plasmas, which have temperatures of 150 million degrees, and we need to keep them away from the wall. And there's always instabilities developing. And so with AI, you can basically train the control algorithms on, let's say, previous events. So especially if you work with a machine already for a long time, you basically can learn from its typical behavior, and you can see instabilities coming and you know what to do with. So we are able now to operate the machine much more stable. And so that helps certainly in that direction, but also in technology. For instance, in JAD, since the machine becomes radioactive after we work with the tritium, we can only make repairs with a robot. So we have this very long arm which shifts into the machine, and it has many pivot points. And so it's a human operator which basically goes in, and then like a snake you need to bend it at the proper moment, and otherwise you hit into the wall. And you can make also use of machine learning to basically follow, while the operator is doing this, how this arm moves in. And so you can do this first movement already very fast. So you bring the arm very quickly to the right position, and then the operator does the work. It's like the fancy cars nowadays, which have this automatic remote parking, where you basically step out of your car and then you push a button and then it puts the car in the proper space. And this is the same, and we use it already in fusion in many different fields. And I'm sure in space we're using similar kind of things. And I think it would be surprised if a company like SpaceX is not already using that for, well, the way how they bring the booster rockets back on Earth. There's a lot of learning in there and seeing how the rocket reacts to the engines, and so I think it will certainly help the field forward, both space and fusion.
I find it still incredible every time I see these rockets landing upright. There's something so counterintuitive, like it's your brain is still trying to process. Is this thing moving forward, or it's actually am I watching something back? Going in a reverse. So for this rocket to land, and
it was beautiful to see the two rockets almost landing simultaneously recently. That was really fantastic.
What is it, Tony, when sometimes you allow yourself to look into the future, what is your imagination creating? What type of future, with the understanding of the current technology and what has been accomplished and what is like just over the hill, what do you think is like the future? Is it a world where energy, like we just mentioned a little bit earlier, it's ubiquitous, right? We don't think about energy anymore. Is it where we have rockets that are no more on kerosene or liquid oxygen, but are on these small nuclear reactors? What do you see in the future?
Well, I think there's not really limits. We can do a lot there. So what is important is to have a long-term vision, and this is something which is lacking in especially the political part of the population. So politicians, they often have only a horizon of 4 or 8 years. And you don't see often politicians which say, well, I want to basically develop this world, I want to do this for my country, and this is where we need to be in 20 years, and therefore we need to do this now to get there. Without that long-term thinking, it's very difficult to, get somewhere. Of course, there's always breakthroughs, there's advances, but there are different kind of advances than when someone really has the guts to set up a big project. We've seen it in the US with the Apollo project, where John F. Kennedy said, well, we are going to do that. And it was done, you pour the money and you set a team up with enough people. I think if we would do that for fusion, I'm always advertising fusion, if you regard it as a Manhattan-like project or a moonshot project, we can do it, but a single team and really this is where we need to go. We can do a lot, both in space, both in fusion, both in energy. If we keep on each time thinking of steps of like only 4 years, because that's a political horizon, it's very hard. I see that also when I speak to politicians myself, when I speak about the timescales of fusion. They're actually not so much interested, because why should they fund in fusion? Because they want to put the money in a project which they can, flourish with, and which is good for them. If it's something which only comes in 20 years, they're not so interested. And this is a way of thinking which I completely miss. I don't see it. And maybe since I'm working on an energy source which is for the future, I'm kind of naturally doing this kind of things, and I find that really it's missing. I was a number of years ago. I was still in the Netherlands, and there was elections only in my town. They were putting 2 towns together. So there were the campaigns, and all the national politicians, they came to my town to campaign. And so on a Saturday in the market, I walked around, and then I was stopped by these politicians, and they said, are you going to vote on Wednesday? We always vote on Wednesday. Then I said, well, yes, I'm going to vote. On who are you going to vote? And I said, well, it depends on who gives the best answer to my question. And then, well, they asked, what is your question? I said, where do you want this town to be in 20 years from now? And what are you doing now to get there? And then they immediately start what they're doing now. And I said, sorry, you're not answering a question. Where do you want to get? How do you want? And there was only one lady from a local political party, not a national. And she really started by saying, I want to have a city where young and old live together, where there's also different races, different ethnicities, should live together in a peaceful way. There should be proper education for the children. The elderly people should be not in elderly people home, but they should be mixed with the normal population, that the people take care of them. And I voted for her. I found that such a beautiful answer, and I miss that kind of deeper thinking, that long-term vision, which is really lacking in our society.
Yeah, usually our leaders should be the one kind of managing the future, understanding the long-term, these long-term decisions that need to be made for the better of tomorrow. But we're so caught up into the immediate, and people really have a hard relationship with change, right? It's easy to say that we want things, but then we don't want the consequences of it. Nobody wants child labor, but nobody wants to pay the real price for anything. Nobody wants drilling in the Arctic, but nobody wants to pay the higher price of fuel. And the politicians, they're looking into their jobs, and then they want to cater to the immediate understanding that these long-term visions are hard to sell to the public. And with the media, it's so easy to have these big headliners who just basically kind of trashed anything that is harder to make, and fusion is all part of it. Tony, with the long career in working in the field of achieving the impossible, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
That's a hard one. I would say, certainly the word peace, which we started with. I would say peace is that's 4 words. Peace is important, and for me, this is a kind of important. I've been always a kind of person which tries to bring people together, and to unify people, and to try to get people, let's say, on a similar vision. And I think we need people which unify the world again, in one way or the other. And I hope that we get some politicians which have vision. I'm pretty much worried now by the US situation. With the 2 potential candidates for the presidency, I really don't understand why. But okay, maybe I should not make political statements here. Let me refrain from making political statements.
Yeah, well, the world is going through, from what happened in France just recently, we'll see what happens in England. I think we're definitely in a time of turmoil when it comes to these ideologies, or, I think that there's an anger that hasn't been addressed, or because the world is facing change and we're not prepared for it, or we haven't given the skills for people to navigate that change, which I wanted to ask you, your 3 words of wisdom is peace is important, but what would you think the skill set is needed for people to achieve peace, or to work towards peace? What do we need to have, or to teach? You're going to school. You're going to give a speech in Belgium in a few days. What is the skill set to work towards peace?
What is important is to teach people this long-term vision, and also the understanding for other visions, because whatever you think, it might not be, let's say, the correct thinking, or there can be other thoughts on how to tackle a certain problem or to work to a certain solution. So to be open for the the others and the opinions of others, and to try to work with that, to try to find the best way forward. So I would say understanding, maybe peace, understanding, and long-term vision would be, 3 words of wisdom. If a long-term vision is 3 words on itself, but okay.
No, so perspective, understanding, communication and perspective, how all these things coming together now we're 8 billion people on the planet. There's 8 billion different stories, and the work that I'm trying to do with Future Space and these podcasts and these conversations is really bringing everything back to the human story and making people understand that we're all working towards the same goal, even with the people that you disagree with. And if you think that you don't, is often because there's a lot of pain involved, a lot of suffering, and it does not excuse people's behavior, but if you can look into the past, you can understand how things are today, and it creates empathy, and then suddenly we can all kind of work together. And you've been obviously playing your role, and I'm looking forward for another conversation. I know that we started at Starmus, and we were talking about Germany, and we're talking about China, about energy, and I'm just glad that we're continuing this conversation. I'm looking forward for our next, Tony.
Yeah, it would be very nice whenever you're in the neighborhood here, or whenever I'm in Vancouver. So then I think, I could give you a sign. We could meet for a drink or whatever, and would be nice. Or maybe the next Tarmas, which is already being planned now. So
yeah, it's going to be back in Spain and the Canary Islands. But I'm due for a visit in Munich. We haven't been. I used to go every year for the DLD conference. And obviously, I have many friends over there. So Munich is calling us again. So
okay. So whenever you're here, give me a sign and we meet.
Excellent, Tony. Always a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the day.
It was a pleasure. So thank you for the nice talk.
Thank you.
So see you. Bye bye.